Hi, this is Kim Colapreti with Team Diva Real Estate at Coldwell Banker Bain. And we're here today with a really good friend of mine, Arik Korman. We go way back, don't we? And Arik is currently the communication director at the League of Education Voters. And we have him here today because we want to talk about the new budget that the governor came out with to fund education. There's a lot of changes that he's looking to make, and we feel those changes are really important for our state and for the folks we serve, which are community homeowners, people in Washington State and locally. So thanks for being here, Arik.
You're welcome.
Yeah, let's get into the meat of the conversation. So tell us a little bit about what the governor just released as far as the budget and what his goals are in making these changes to education funding.
Okay, well, let me give you a little bit of history first.
Oh, great. That's very helpful.
You bet. In 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that the state was not adequately funding public education.
Oh, okay.
And that was a decision called the McCleary decision.
Right, okay.
That was a lawsuit that was filed by the McCleary family back in 2007. So it took the Supreme Court 5 years.
Not surprising, but...
to make a ruling. Yeah, and in our state, it is said in the Constitution that it is Washington's paramount duty to fund education.
Okay. That's not a bad thing to be in your Constitution, is
it? Exactly. And it was on the legislature to find a way to make that happen.
Right.
Unfortunately, it wasn't done quickly, and the Supreme Court held the state in contempt last year in 2015.
Okay.
And because of that, they're fining the legislature $100,000 a day.
Oh, and this is something that most people don't even know about.
No.
Okay. So, and that's costing the taxpayers, I'm assuming, when they're funding the legislature.
Well, the reality is it's going into a spreadsheet, and it's for a fund for education. So.
Okay. But how that money is going to be... Who's going to come up with that money is still debatable.
Well, it's just part of the state.
It's just part of the state. Okay.
Yeah, it's just part of the state budget. So anyway, this fine of $100,000 a day has been going on. Mm-hmm. And then the Supreme Court had another hearing in September of this year, just a few months ago. Mm-hmm. And they said, you know what, we're really serious. You need to get this done. And you need to get it done this next session, the 2017 session. We need to see real progress toward fully funding education.
Okay.
And so that's where the governor stepped in. And he presented a plan to raise the funds necessary to get the job done. And we like it because it's a conversation starter. I mean, as the League of Education Voters, we're not in support of every single thing the governor said.
Right.
But he's talking about an investment of nearly $4 billion into our education system.
And this is an increased investment?
Yes.
Oh, so an increase of $4 billion. Wow, that's going to be a huge amount of money for the communities to improve schools across Washington State.
Yep, that's the idea.
So tell us about how we funded education in the past that's not constitutional, and what are the changes the governor is now making to fund education and get that $4 billion?
Okay. Now, the way it was supposed to work is that the state is supposed to fully fund basic education. And there was a number of laws that were passed to define what that is.
Okay.
But what's happened over the years is that the state contribution wasn't enough to pay teacher salaries and do the basic things of 1,080 hours of instruction per year. I mean, these very spreadsheet type things that were more focused on adults instead of kids in our state.
Right. Okay.
And so what's happened is that the local school districts had to make up the difference because they couldn't afford to hire teachers, at least enough teachers, under what the state was providing them. So the local districts had their own leaves.
Right.
Their own local levies.
And this is what we vote on every 2 years?
Sometimes
it depends on every 4. So it depends on the county.
Yeah, it depends on the school district.
Or it depends on the school district. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the school districts vote on these levies every few years, and that money comes from where when the levies get passed?
The money for the levies comes from primarily property taxes.
Property taxes, right. Which is a direct impact to homeowners because some homeowners can't afford to have their property taxes go up year after year, and sometimes the levies don't pass.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay, so it's not really how do I put it, a consistent way to fund education.
Yeah, not consistent and also not equitable.
Not equitable, right. That's a great thing to say. It's definitely not equitable.
Sure, because there are some districts that are able to get their levies passed. They have higher property values, and so they're able to spend more money on teachers, and so the quality of the teachers they hire is higher than some of the other districts that don't have the money.
So funding schools through levies system really isn't a sustainable way to fund education.
Well, yeah, and it's not equitable either.
Right, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and the issue is you've got some districts that have high property values, and they're able to pass their levies every time or nearly every time. And so because they have more of that local money, they're able to spend more money on higher quality teachers.
Right. And I'm assuming the districts that are traditionally not high income districts are always struggling to get enough money to get teachers, pay them well enough, and keep them in those schools. So they're just consistently struggling.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's unconstitutional to do this because the state
That's good to know.
Yeah, the state is supposed to fully cover the cost of teachers.
Great.
The issue is that some of the districts can pay more because they pass their levies consistently, and others don't. And that's not constitutional. It's the state is supposed to fully fund the cost of teachers.
Great.
But as it turns out, the way that it's being done now is local districts are funding about 30% of the cost of hiring teachers.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Right, it's a lot of money. And that's what has to change under the McCleary ruling.
Okay, and that's a pretty regressive way to fund education because you're relying on increased property taxes and nothing else, really, I'm assuming, when you're funding 30% of education that way.
That's very true. Yeah, and the general fund, of course, is used for education, and that's based on the sales tax. And that's
which is also regressive, right?
Well, right, and that's a whole other discussion.
I know. Yeah, let's not get down in that road because we could talk about income tax, but that's a whole different conversation.
That's a whole different conversation.
So, being that we don't have an income tax in the state, and we are funding the schools through levies, which we're not supposed to be relying on that, what does the governor's budget now do to change that system so we're not unconstitutional in how we fund our education system?
Well, what it's doing is that it would put more money into the system so that the state doesn't have to rely on those local district levies anymore.
So does the governor's budget now limit how much the schools have to raise in levies for the future and then have different ways of supplying those funds or coming up with those funds?
Well, what that does is it puts more money into the state system.
Okay.
And if there's more money into the state system, then the local districts don't have to rely on those levies as much.
Okay.
Because ideally, what those levies are supposed to do is to fund extras. So say if you want a special art class or music class or something like that.
They're not supposed to be paying teachers' salaries.
No, not your basic second grade teacher.
Right, which is a huge problem.
Right.
So, what are the new funding streams that the governor has come up with to raise this $4 billion?
Well, he's proposed two major streams. One of them is a slight increase to the B&O tax.
Okay.
And the other one is a carbon tax.
Let's talk first about the carbon tax, because I'm really curious about that. Then we could talk about the B&O tax.
Yeah. All right. So the idea of a carbon tax is that companies who pollute will basically have to pay a tax. I mean,
and how big is the tax?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. That's good. So that's some detail that we can find out, and that's also probably still not completely solidified because this is just a plan. It's not
right. It's a conversation starter.
It's a conversation starter. So the idea is that the people that are polluting in the state, that money would go to fund education.
Right.
Okay. And then the other thing you mentioned was the B&O tax.
Was the B&O tax, exactly.
So do you know what the B&O tax increase is?
My understanding is that it goes from 1.5% to 2.5%.
Right. That's what our understanding is too. And so that seems to be an issue that is of concern to a lot of people who are in the Realtor Association. Mm-hmm. At least we've gotten wind that there's concern. Now, they haven't made a decision yet about what their stance is going to be, and there's still a lot of conversation, and we hope that conversation will keep going. But one of the issues I think that realtors are concerned about is, hey, that seems like a high increase. But in reality, if you're selling a $300,000 house, it's really just $92 extra a transaction. For some realtors, that might be a lot. For us, it's about $15,000, but hey, $15,000, that could pay for a whole teacher's salary.
Yeah, or give a boost to beginning teachers, because right now the beginning teacher salary in Washington State, just the state portion of it, is like $36,000.
Oh, geez, that is ridiculous.
Yeah, so if you're going to attract people to the profession, it's really hard to do that when you pay so little.
Right.
And especially if you want to get teachers that reflect the communities they serve.
That's a very important point.
Right, because we really do need diversity when it comes to our education staff.
We do. So one of the big issues is that if your levy system doesn't raise enough money, and you're in like a poorer community or a rural community, you're probably not being able to pad those teachers' salaries. So you're only able to pay them that $36,000 a year, which means those teachers are going to have, new teachers are going to have a harder time wanting to go to those communities and teach. They're going to go to the communities where they can make more money. Right. And they're probably not necessarily going to want to stay in those communities and teach because they're not going to have the ability to increase their salaries down the road. So being able to raise that base salary is a huge plus across the board in the state.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would the new base salaries be? Do you know what the increase is?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
We don't know yet. But the governor last year tried to boost them to $40,000, at least the state contribution to that, which again is not really very much, but it's an increase.
It is an increase. And I think I read something where the goal is to get them up to like $57,000 if possible.
It really is a talent issue, because if you don't have a salary that's competitive, you're not going to get the best and brightest becoming our teachers. And we're talking about investing in our future.
Right. And, you know, from our standpoint, too, lots of our clients are teachers or work in the school district. And if they're not making a living wage, they can't afford to buy a house, which means they're not investing in their community. They're not in a stable environment necessarily, because if you can't own a home, you're probably not in as stable a place if you're renting. And unless you have a partner who makes a lot of money, you're relying on teacher income to buy a house. And we know $35,000, even $40,000, it's tough to buy a house in most of the state with that income.
Yeah, that's very true.
So it really feels like getting teacher salaries up is a positive across the board.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I just need to say that the $36,000 or even the $40,000 that was proposed by the governor last year was just the state contribution. So that when you add the local levy contribution that each district tacks on, it's a little bit more.
That's a little bit more, right. That's great.
Yeah.
What is a beginning teacher salary, say, in Seattle?
So in Seattle, it's not even $50,000.
Jeez, that is crazy. So that's a pretty, I mean, even though it's a beginning salary, you're still talking about someone who's had years of education and is educating the future of our state and our country, and they're only making $50,000 a year. That's
in Seattle.
In Seattle, right. I mean, if they're teaching in Yakima, they're probably not even making close to that amount.
Right.
Is there other things that the governor's funding increase will focus on to improve education?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of other things.
Okay.
One of them is increasing funding to the Learning Assistant Program. They call it LAP. Okay. And that's for kids who need more help. There's a number of kids in the state who need extra tutoring or help with reading or with math. And the LAP dollars is key to bringing them up to speed.
And I would imagine that the states that don't, or the areas that don't have enough levy funds probably are severely lacking in that program.
Right. Well, the pie is still pretty small, and it's state money. So there really isn't much room to contribute more to that.
Right.
Yeah, that's an issue there. Another way that the governor wants to help kids is by increasing quality early childhood education.
Oh, that's a great program.
Yeah, it's called ECAP, the Early Childhood Educational Assistance Program.
Okay.
And this is for low-income families who would like to get their kids into quality preschool, pre-K, and so that way the kids will be kindergarten ready. It's a great system that the state has, but unfortunately there just hasn't been enough money to get the kids who are eligible into the system. That's right.
So the number of kids that are eligible rarely get access to this program, even though the program exists, because there's just never been enough money to fund it.
Right now, the shortfall, I believe, is 17,000 kids who are eligible but aren't being served.
That's a lot of kids.
That's a lot of kids.
And they're probably mostly in areas where they need this program.
Right.
Their moms can't afford or dads can't afford to send them to Montessori school or something like that.
Well, or the mom has to work 3 jobs.
Right, which is probably more likely, right, that they can't get them to the program.
Yeah, there's all kinds of issues.
There's all kinds of issues, okay.
Right. And the third one is funding to the state need grant. That's a college tuition program for low-income students.
Oh,
and that's for either a 2-year, 4-year certificate programs. So it's not just they can only go to UW. It's a system that right now there's about 25,000 students who are eligible and aren't funded right now. This would help out by adding another 14,000.
Oh, wow.
So it's a good chunk.
So
it's not all of them.
Wouldn't get all of them, but
No.
it would get half of them into the program.
More than half, yes.
More than half, which is
Right.
great. That's another great approach to improving education beyond just, beyond just basic education, but into college education.
Right.
So,
because at the League of Education Voters, we're interested in the whole spectrum.
The whole spectrum of education.
Yeah, we
right.
call it cradle through college.
Right. Okay, great. Well, that sounds like some really great programs the governor is focused on. Is there anything else in particular that this money would fund that's kind of struggling right now?
I had the honor of sitting down with the governor on the day his budget was released.
Oh,
and
so you talked to Jay directly
so
about
I talked to Jay directly. And what he told me was that he wanted to invest in programs that were proven. So the LAP program, the ECAP program, the state need grant, and funding beginning teacher salaries, those were things that worked.
Right.
And if you put money into those things, you'll see results.
You'll improve education. So we have all these systems in the state that are proven programs that are barely being used because the money isn't there to get kids in the program or to really improve teacher salaries and also improve resources for teachers.
Yeah.
So that they can also better serve their students.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wouldn't say they're barely being used. They're being used as much as they can be.
As much as they can,
That's
right. So they're being used, but not to the full extent
that they should
be being
right.
used. Okay, that's a better way to say that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is all going to improve down the road. And is there anything in particular that you feel is going to be a sticking point in getting the budget passed?
Well, there's different opinions as to where the revenue sources
should come from.
Exactly.
Is there any discrepancy as to what the program should be funded? I mean, is there anyone that disagrees that these are all important programs to fund or that we need this money from the state? I mean, is there any discrepancy about that?
No. Most legislators, for example, believe that it's important to really create equal opportunities for all students.
Great.
Regardless of what zip code they come from, regardless of what race they are.
So we don't have any disagreement about the fact that education is important, improving teacher salaries, getting these programs funded, and making sure that these systems or these programs are available across the board. We're all kind of on the same page with that.
In general, I think that's a fair statement.
So the real sticking point is how the money's going to be funded. Do you have thoughts about where that conflict might be in funding based on conversations you've had or heard?
Well, there are some legislators who are not in favor of, say, a carbon tax. Or
I could see that.
Are not in favor of a B&O tax.
I could see that.
Or are not in favor of any tax increases at all.
Right. Do they have other suggestions on how we should get this money?
Well, some legislators have said that growth will take care of it. Economic growth for the state will be all that we need.
Haven't we had some economic growth for the past few years?
We have.
Has that taken care of it?
Ask the Supreme Court.
Right. Apparently they don't think so.
Exactly.
And I think that's a really valuable conversation. And I mean, I know that there's going to be lots of differing opinions. I mean, it's really hard for anyone to say, we don't support education and we don't think education needs to be funded. I mean, no one's really going to say that. The real question is, at some point, people have to put their money where their mouth is. And if education's important and valuable to all of us, and it impacts all of our communities, and it impacts our business community, and it impacts how effective we are in bringing people to Washington State and keeping people in Washington State, we have to be able to say, we're going to sacrifice somewhere and fund this.
Well, we have to definitely look at where our future workers are coming from,
right.
For example. There's going to be what the Washington Roundtable, of all people. The Washington Roundtable released a report about future jobs in Washington State. And they happen to be one of our partners that we work with.
Tell us quickly who the Washington Roundtable is.
The Washington Roundtable is a group of large businesses. So we're talking Alaska Airlines, Boeing, Microsoft, Amazon.
Great.
So yeah, the big companies in the state.
Big wigs. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And they say that there's going to be 740,000 new jobs created in the next few years, and that 70% of them will require some kind of post-secondary degree or certificate in order to do these jobs. Right now, in Washington State, only about 31% of our kids get that post-secondary degree or certificate.
Which is not enough to fill these jobs, which means we're not going to be filling these jobs with kids from Washington State.
Right. We have to import them from somewhere.
Right. Which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not necessarily a good thing. I mean, we have all this opportunity in the state. The fact that kids in this state won't be able to even qualify for these jobs because they're not getting the education that they need seems kind of ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it's just from a next generation perspective. I mean, wouldn't you want our kids to at least have the option of being able to get these family wage jobs?
Of course you would. I mean, it's great to have people moving to the state, but we also see, as realtors, we see all the time when new people move here, the number one thing they ask is, how are the schools?
Right.
And yeah, we're not so bad in Seattle, but I'm sure there's other realtors working in other districts who don't have the luxury of saying, yeah, there's a variety of different degrees of schools you can go to and different options of places you can live, and you have to deal with the school systems in that community as they are. And why would you want to be put in that position? Why wouldn't we want to be able to say that every school in this state is a good school and that we have a fully funded education system regardless of where you move in Washington State?
Right. It shouldn't matter what your zip code is to get a good education.
Right. So, yeah, Chavi and I, known us for a long time, and you know that we are always really involved in the community, and community is really important to us. And I think one of the things we as realtors don't necessarily view our job as just selling houses. We view our job as building communities and helping stabilize communities, because homeownership is part of improving neighborhoods and improving communities. So being able to have more teachers be able to be homeowners, being able to say that every school district and every school in Seattle is an amazingly well-funded school, or in Tacoma, is something that's really important to us. So we've been talking to a lot of our realtor friends and talking to the community, and we are basically saying we think that B&O tax, I know it's a tax increase, but we have got to pay for education somewhere. And we're okay with that increase. It's not that much. I mean, $92 a transaction. I mean, most people won't even notice that money coming out of their, coming out of the transaction. And knowing that money is going to really help improve schools and education in the state, that makes me feel good. I mean, I'm okay with paying that money, and I really hope that a lot of realtors feel the same way, because I feel like we have to be together with the governor on this issue, or find a way that we can connect on this issue and find a happy medium or common ground. Because if everyone just says, no, we don't want it to come out of our pockets, well, the pockets it's coming out of is our community, right? I mean, if we're not going to pay for it in the state, then who's going to pay for it? Homeowners through taxes, which is not a positive thing. And also apparently unconstitutional. So we don't really have a choice, I guess, to come up with a solution.
Right, we'll see. And again, the governor's budget is a conversation starter.
Right.
And we still have to see what the Senate comes up with for their budget and the House comes up with their budget.
So this is just a starting point conversation. And for us, we just wanted to have this conversation so we can educate folks out there about what's happening around education in the state and how they can get involved. And we really would like folks to take the time to find out more about this issue, talk to your legislator, talk to people in your school district. If you don't have kids, talk to someone who does have kids, and really find out more about this issue. Let your legislator know that education's important, and let them know that funding education should be a number one priority.
And wouldn't it be great if Washington State had one of the best education systems in the country?
It would be great. It would be great for all of us, for realtors, for business, for teachers, for students, for homeowners. It would be great for all of us.
Well, let me tell you something.
Okay.
Right now, when it comes to high school graduation, we are number 38 in the country.
Pathetic. I mean, that's really sad. I mean, not to joke about it, but it really is sad that we have such an amazing state and there's so many great things about the state, yet our education system is definitely lacking. And that's going to start impacting business and the future of our generations not that long coming down the pike if we don't do something about it.
Well, we can do much better.
We can do much better. And as realtors and as business folks and as community members, we're saying, let's have the conversation. Let's not be afraid to fund education. And, if that means an increase in B&O taxes, Chavi and I are saying we are all for it because we believe education should be paramount in Washington State. So basically, Chavi and I are saying, as realtors, we 100% support the plan of the governor to move forward and fully fund education. And if that includes a B&O tax, we're totally okay with it because we really think that funding education is way more important. And you know what? All of us have to give a little bit to get a lot. And this will be getting a lot if we can go from 38 to number 1. And we always like being number 1, as Arik probably knows. We're all about being number 1 at Team Diva. So thank you so much for being here today, Arik. This is really, really important conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you again down the road.
You bet. If you want more information, go to educationvoters.org.
Oh, great. educationvoters.org if you want more information. Thanks, Arik.
You're so welcome.
Thank you. And remember, if you have any questions and you want to know more about this issue, feel free to contact us at Team Diva. And this is Kim Colapreti saying ciao for now.